Well, when a Buddhist contemplates the breath, extends his awareness from that to the whole body, vipassana type approach, to the mind also, to the environment, whether it's a flower, a tree, or a lake, whatever the person might meditate on, as in Hinduism and so on. You're actually becoming more and more conscious of more and more of God's manifestation as creation. I don't mean in creation, I mean as creation. As you, as the train you're travelling on, as the person you're talking to, as the table you're sitting at. The more you get to know God, well, this is life eternal, to know the only true God. There is none other. They're not little gods like you and me. There's just God. Until you become an adult in the kingdom of heaven. And then you realize the validity of the concept of the plurality of God. If they eat of the fruit of the tree of good and evil, they will become like us. Well, of course, Adam and Eve had tasted, hadn't they, in the story? They're not going to be happy with not eating the fruit again. So you turn them out of the Garden of Eden, so to speak, into the other place, if you like, that grows an immense amount of this fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. And they live, experience living and experience dying accordingly. But, you have the story of the prodigal, don't you? I mean, they're still born of God. Come back in the end. In a sense, that's who we are. We play soldiers. Run the enemy down. Shoot people. Play cowboys and Indians. Shoot each other. Well, don't play cowboys and Indians now, but they used to anyway. They play, I don't know, Darth Vader and that now, do they? I'm not sure. They must have moved on from that by now. So we experience good and evil. We experience living and dying, being born and so on. And we learn what we value and what we don't, what we shy away from because the consequences are death and destruction. Error, as it used to be called, now it's retranslated the word sin as something really depraved and evil. But it's simply error, isn't it? Error until you know better, and you don't know better till you've learned, and you can't learn without experience. You can learn a lot from being told in faith, of course, but the really big things, there's got to be a pattern of experience to make you embrace some of those things. So the Buddhist is, even against his conviction perhaps, worshipping God, focusing on every nuance and detail and individuality of everything around him. He's becoming fully conscious. Well, there's only God to be conscious of. So he's coming to know God, isn't he? He's entering onto life eternal. Jolly good. And the scientist? Well, I don't think he's any different, is he? He's studying desperately to see and know the universe that he's in better. Sure, his motivation is some sort of conquest of control, but it's not just that. It's the sheer pleasure of understanding, of finding the compatibility, what the rules are, what the relationships are, and what you can therefore do by manipulating the whole show. You see, he's extending his depth into the mind of God, isn't he? He's a worshipper. Absolutely. And you know, the mad scientist used to be obviously a worshipper. He lived strangely and hair wild, sort of Einsteinian sort of man that focuses everything on his one passion. Single-minded worship, you see. Thank you, Heavenly Father. So, true mindfulness is not an obsession with simply breathing in the present. Full mindfulness is greater and greater consciousness of all that is, all that has been, and by conjecture, all that may be. Mindfulness is what God manifests as to us, for we can receive nothing to handle but through our mind and the thoughts generated supposedly by this external environment. In fact, it's an environment of mind that simply is closed off to us, apart from certain consequences upon us. And it's that not knowing that makes us reach out into the unknown. And therefore there is in life, in living as we understand it here in the school in childhood, great uncertainty. The teacher doesn't have that. He may have all sorts of uncertainties himself, in adult, normal schools, ordinary schools. But he knows what he's teaching. He's been teaching it for years. He'd do it with his eyes shut. In fact, he'd do it in his dreams. It's the children that are wrestling with the uncertainty, the bewilderment. They're the ones suffering from the fog, the boundary, not the teacher. Of course, in this world that we're in, a good teacher actually manifests as someone who's learning with you, and you learn with him, and he can communicate the difficulties he's had and still has, perhaps, on certain issues, and it becomes alive in the sense that it's not all being served up on a plate. It has all sorts of intriguing questions that have not been answered yet for the student, and probably not for the teacher either. So I maintain that I don't actually teach. I try to inspire, and if I inspire, they'll go away and handle the material with enthusiasm and purpose of mind. And they won't come up with the same answers as me. But they'll come up with their answers. Their slant, their view, their individuality, their progress, their extension into what was previously unknown, undreamt of, unthought of, and so forth. Thank you, Heavenly Father. Strictly speaking, any one truth utterly focused upon implies all the other truths. That's the hard way of doing it, though. It's a universal way of doing it in that you don't need to keep starting from different points of view. Simply start with the breath and focus on it utterly. And there is a conditioning that comes from the practice which makes you able to be fully conscious extremely efficiently of things other than the breath once you've mastered being majorly conscious of the breath. In other words, it exercises a facility in you for applying the focusing, the concentration, the way of opening into God's mind on any issue. So, you didn't need to focus on the breath. You could have focused on the lake in front of you, earnestly, probably for a very long time, depending on how earnest and focused you're able to be. Right, I'm going to break it there and